Hello chess friends and welcome to Azadov's chess channel and welcome to the TCEC Season 18 Premier Division. So, after many rounds, Leela C0 and Stockfish are finally in the lead. The Stockfish is on the first place, Leela C0 is on the second place, and I really like to analyze this game. This is really incredible for me because this engine, they provide so many tactical possibilities, which is really incredible in static games like in this one that I wanted to show you today. It's a Ruy Lopez game, it's a common static game, but then again Leela C0 will provide some tactics, and I really can't stop analyzing these games. This is really a great thing for me, and I've been asked now by one of my followers, don't you have troubles with your wife when you analyze for 3 hours chess games? Well, basically I have to admit it, but I don't mind to sleep on the couch for a while when I analyze some chess games because I will risk it. I really like to do this, and maybe I will have problems, but I'll try it. I try it again. So let's see now the game. Here we have e4 played by Leela C0. We have e5 by this other engine Ethereal. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to b5. We have a6, bishop to a4, so still common theory of the Ruy Lopez. We have knight to f6, which is the so-called Murphy defense, challenging immediately this pawn on e4. And we have now kingside castling. So there are these ideas to play knight takes e4, so I've analyzed it now many times, so you can check it out. We'll not analyze now this particular line. So here bishop to e7, we have now the most natural way here to proceed to castle to secure the king, play d6, develop the light square bishop, and similar ideas. So here d3 played by Leela c0, we have d6 and c3. A common idea to get this pawn structure a little bit mobile. The main goal here is to play the move d4, but you have to also secure sometimes your e4 pawn, which could be problematic because if you advance this pawn, then your e4 pawn is of course not protected. Here Ethereal tries a pinning idea, and I've used now already this game in one of my basics in chess videos, in which I wanted to show you how to unpin yourself. Here Leela C0 showed really some great defensive strategies and played here simply knight to d2. After queen to d7, we have now h3, kicking away the bishop. This is now this defensive strategy. As I said, if you want to see more of this game, I've analyzed it, as I said, in my basics in chess in these defensive strategies, how to unpin yourself. Here again, after the move bishop to h5, we have this very nice move rook to e1, with ideas to play knight to f1 and then knight to g3, kicking away the bishop. So we don't want to play moves as g4 because these moves are of course weakening the pawn structure too much in front of your king. There are even some tactical threats with knight to g4, so that's why castling here. And now we have this maneuver knight to f1 with rook to e8, and now knight to g3, kicking away the bishop. So if black takes, bishop takes f3, it's not a problem. I think queen takes f3. We're continuing the game with a very nice bishop pair, still with possibilities to play something like bishop to e3 and then to push the pawn on d4, maybe even further to d5. So in the game here, after the move knight to g3, as I said, bishop to g6 was played, and now finally this move d4, cracking the position in the center. The threat is of course to play the move d5 immediately, so that's why here b5 played by Ethereal, kicking away the bishop, and now bishop to c2. So it seems that maybe bishop to b3 is much more powerful as you're aiming here against this f7, but bishop to c2 is very important in Ruy Lopez games because you want to protect further your pawn on e4, because black's idea to counterplay in the center is to play something like bishop to d8 or bishop to f8 and then to take e takes d4, and then you would have troubles to defend here this pawn on e4. We could include some other attackers into the game, and that's why here bishop to c2, very nice defensive move. So e takes d4, now comes this idea after c takes d4. What white has here as a strategical advantage is, of course, as I always like to say, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself in videos, but it's really important to say that this pawn central control is a very important strategical element in chess games to restrict these 4 squares for your opponent's pieces. So now there is really a dynamic position in which black could try maybe to crack the position with the move d5, but then you risk maybe even some e5 moves. So you should be careful here from black's perspective, and that's why here Ethereal plays on a very nice idea, knight to h5. If you take knight takes h5, then you get pinned again, so we don't want to do that. You see bishop to h5 comes very active into the game. Again, you don't want to play something like G4. So here in the game, that's why after the move knight to h5, we have knight to e2. Still, this pawn is protected. You see how important it was to play the move bishop to c2, and now bishop to d8. Now comes this idea. First, Leela c0 played here this counter attack, g4. After knight to f6, now knight to g3. Again, our center is protected. We have again protected our pawn 3 times, still relying on our pawn central control, on this very nice centralized pawns. We want to now really restrict our opponent's ability to play and maybe try to crack the position somehow with potential e5 or d5 moves. But so far you shouldn't push pawns. You should wait your opponent. For instance, if black tries maybe c5, then we could pass through with d5, or if black tries d5, we could maybe pass through with e5. So you should stay a little bit here with this pawn structure like this, wait your opponent to see what he'll do, then when he moves the pawn, then it's time maybe to strike with some pawn storms in the center. So rook to c8, we have king to g2. Very, very important move. You see in the continuation of the game why this move is important, because we have dynamics in the game. Although there is not a collision in the center, but there is really this tension sort of in the air that something will happen. And when you feel that in chess, you should always keep compact. You should always keep your pieces compact. So this move, king to g2, is also a defensive move, but also an attacking move. You want to, of course, have really a firm structure here. You are protecting basically your knights, which are of course protecting your king, but it's really a common idea. And see the problems if you wouldn't have played this move king to g2 here to move, because here h5 played by Ethereal, we play of course g5. We want to kick away the knight. Taking again is not a powerful idea. Again, you see bishop to h5, pardon me, knight takes h5. After knight takes h5, again bishop takes h5. You're basically inviting back your opponent's bishop into the game. So that's why g5, kicking away the knight. The knight has only one square, so that's why knight to h7, and now bishop to e3. Here comes this moment in which I'll show you why this move king to g2 is very important. I think I've analyzed this game really thoroughly. I've really analyzed it for an hour, and there is this move I've analyzed. I didn't know why Ethereal didn't play this move. It was the move h4. Here in the game, Ethereal tried knight to b4. After the move h4, this game becomes really, really complicated, because now you have to retreat with your knight. You cannot retreat, of course, to e2. You lose your pawn on e4. So knight to f5 would be a forced move, and now I think black should have played here the move bishop to h5. Now we're playing again on the spinning idea. Again we're activating at least our bishop. Queen to d2 would be sort of a must move, but now d5 is black's really great idea here. I think black could white needs to play here the move e5, and now after knight pardon me, here first bishop takes f3, after king takes f3, we would have the possibility to play knight takes e5. This is the tactical threat that Ethereal maybe missed in the game. After d takes e5, rook takes e5, you're attacking your opponent's knight, and there is not a good way to defend here. You have to also secure the king. That's why it was, as I said, very important to play with the move with the king on g2. Basically, bishop to f4 is maybe the best way, but now rook takes f5, bishop takes f5, and here after queen takes here after queen takes f5, white could counterplay maybe with the move rook to e1, but we can cover knight to f8, and still I think this is a very, very weird position in which there are some discovered attack possibilities here by the bishop on the rook. You have to escape with your king because queen to h3 is a serious threat here, so you would be forced to play something like king to g2, but now I think bishop to g5 is really, really tricky, because if you take the rook, then we can first take, of course, the bishop on f4 and then the rook. It will be a problematic thing here for Leela c0. You would be forced to take the knight here on f8 after king to f8. Okay, you can maybe get a bishop, but now c5 here by black is very, very tricky, because we have now 4 versus 2 situation, and here a 3 versus 2 situation. So black would have 3 pawns for a piece. This could be, I think, a very, very interesting position. as I said. But after the move bishop to e3, h4 wasn't played in the game. I've analyzed this particular move because I immediately saw it and I wanted to see what could be a possible continuation here. I think it was maybe a possible. Of course, I couldn't calculate all of these tactics. I had to use the Stockfish engine in order to analyze this, but h4 really a great possibility here for Ethereal. And now we have knight to b4, so h4 wasn't played in the game. So bishop to b1, we want to stay of course with our bishop pair on the board. Knight to c6, and now a3, we have knight to a5. The idea is to cement of course the knight on c4. b3, in order to prevent this idea, is not so good, because then you're weakening the pawn structure too much. You see the queen would be always a little bit stuck to the defense of this pawn on b3, so you don't want to play with your queen like that. The queen needs of course its freedom, so that's why b3 is not a good idea here. Leela c0 found another way in order to crack the position. It's the move a4, so still you can now maybe play on this move knight to c4, which will happen in the game, but now bishop to c1. Still staying with our bishops on the board. As I said, you don't want to lose your bishops in an early stage of the game. That's why bishop to c1, and now we have knight to b6, and now a5, kicking away the knight, knight to a4, and now queen to d2. Protecting everything. Basically, our idea is now finally maybe to kick away the knight with the move b3. So here finally h4. So it's finally this move that maybe Ethereal missed in the continuation of the game. Here knight to f5, played by Leela c0, and now we have d5. This is the idea to crack the position. Of course, you cannot move further because your knight is hanging, but now knight to e5, and the problem is now the queen doesn't have good squares. The queen cannot retreat to e6. If the queen retreats to e6, then really it's game over here for black. It doesn't seem so immediately, but there is this tactic, bishop to a2, liberating really this very powerful diagonal with the support of the pawn. You could try maybe bishop takes f5. After e takes f5, you could go queen to f5, but now g6 is really a great move. If you escape with the knight to f6, then you get simply g takes f7 and you lose the rook. So you would be forced to maybe take the pawn here with f takes g6, but now bishop to d5 comes very active into the game. If you play something like king to h8, then you risk this move knight to f7 and it would be game over, rook to e8. So great tactics that Leela has prepared here. Knight to e5, great move. That's why here rook takes e5, played by Ethereal, and we have d takes e5. So knight to b4, knight takes g5 here. Ethereal at least grabs the pawn, but now queen to d1, attacking the knight. We want to get rid of this knight. This knight is very annoying because it can also take this pawn on e4. And here Leela c0 plays, I think, and again a great move, knight to h6. So taking the knight immediately is not so good, because we can simply take bishop takes f5. Your h3 pawn is attacked, so you would be forced to play something like bishop takes f5 right after queen takes f5. It's really an unclear position. Your king is endangered, and here we still have this possibility to play moves as c5 to get this 4 versus 2 situation on the queen side, here to use this pawn majority. So it's very risky to go into this particular line, although white is slightly better here, but still in the game knight to h6 first, played by Leela c0, so not to play bishop takes e4 here. After knight takes h6, we have g takes h6, but now first bishop takes e4 and knight to c5 was played. If you take, of course, bishop takes e5, then you risk rook takes e4, pardon me, and you cannot take because of the pin on the queen on d7. So that's why knight to c5, bishop takes g6, we have f takes g6, and now bishop takes h6. At least we grabbed another pawn. White is up the exchange, but still this pawn structure is a little bit messy in front of the king. The king is vulnerable, of course, to black's attack, so that's why here after queen to e6 we have to get our bishop back. We have to retreat with the bishop because the bishop needs to be now the main defensive piece in front of white's king. And here Ethereal found also a good tactic, d4. bishop takes d4, and now knight to b3. If you take with the queen, of course, then you lose again the exchange. Knight to b3 with a fork on the queen and the rook, so that's why bishop takes, knight to b3, and now rook to a3, and now queen to d5. So it seems that something went wrong for Leela c0 because the bishop is hanging and you get checked. But here again, queen to h2. After knight takes d4, we have this very nice intermediate attack, queen to g4, with an attack on the g6 pawn and also the rook on c8. So that's why knight to f5, queen takes g6, and now knight to g7. So here Ethereal found a way how to at least defend somehow. This is now really weird endgame in which both kings are endangered. So in the game, queen takes a6 was played, attacking the rook, rook to a8, and now rook to d3, counter-attacking, forcing basically black to trade off the queens. Here after rook takes a6, we have rook takes d5, and we have now a new position in which black has of course some problems to activate this knight, but still there is also a problem for white, because here we have first this move bishop to g5. These pawns are endangered, and still this knight can come very actively into the game. Maybe here knight to f5, so that's why here rook to g1 had to be played in order to create some kind of an activity on the g file. But now we have c6, we have rook to d7 attacking the knight, and now bishop to f4 attacking the king and simply taking this pawn, protecting everything. And this is really a complex a complex endgame. How to make something happen here for white. Your pawn is hanging, these two pawns are hanging, so that's why b4 has to be played, and now we have c5. You don't want to keep the position like this, because you have to split these pawns in order to make something happen, so that's why c5 perfectly fine. There is this threat of white to play rook to b7 and then rook to b6 to get really a very nice pass pawn here on the b file, so that's why c5, we have b takes c5, and now b4. So here Ethereal creates also another pass pawn, which could cause some problems for white, so that's why here f4, a very nice move to deflect the bishop, of course, from the defense of the knight, so that's why bishop to c3 had to be played, and now rook to b7, applying the so-called Tarrasch rule, which says you should always go behind your enemy's pawns. So when your opponent is threatening to promote, go always with your rook behind this pawn. After the move king to f8, we have rook to d1, creating some checkmate preparations here with rook to dx, so that's why knight to e8 had to be played. Rook to dx still played by Leela c0, and we have now bishop to f6 attacking the rook, and rook to c8. This is now basically game over, because the problem is now that this pawn is marching on. We can always push this pawn further. The problem is black cannot do the same. b3 is not a possibility. We'll simply take this pawn, so the pieces are a little bit stuck here like this. It is sort of a Zugzwang position here for black. Black doesn't have good moves here. Rook takes a5, simply played, but now you see c6, simply the pawn keeps rolling. Here we have rook to c5, and now rook to b8, attacking this knight twice. You cannot protect it by any piece anymore. That's why king to f7 had to be played, and now rook takes e8, rook takes c6, but now rook to e3, bishop to d4, rook to e4 attacking the bishop, bishop to c3, and now rook to b7 attacking the king. And now here Leela c0 plays simply actively with the king. Everything is protected, but the problem is, if this game would be without this pawn, it could maybe be a draw, but still white has this extra pawn here, which can of course be promoted. Here in the game, rook to c5 was played, but now again another great element of this chess game here, rook to f8, is the serious threat to get also a support of this pawn and then simply push it further. So rook to d5, we have rook to f8 attacking the king, king to e6, and now simply king to g4. You have to play actively with your king. In the game, rook to d6 was played, and now Leela c0 simply takes another pawn, king takes h4, king to d5, king to g5, we have king to c4, and now simply pushing this pawn. And after h5, rook to g1, another problem, we can simply hide behind our pawn, king to f5, rook to h1, and now king to g6, and after rook to g1, here Ethereal is resigned. There's nothing basically you can do. We can always hide behind these pawns, simply push these pawns further. It's not so easy for black to push this pawn. With b3 you can always get some checks here with the rook to c8, rook to b8, maybe even sacrifice the rook for the exchange, but continuing the game with these two pass pawns. So as I said, in this position Ethereal resigns. So great game by Leela C0, great attack in the Ruy Lopez, great defensive strategies. It was really a fun game for me to watch with great tactical elements. So far, as I said, the Stockfish is in the lead, has a whole point in front of Leela C0. Leela C0 is half of the point in front of this other engine, Stoofvlees. We'll see what will happen. I'm predicting that Leela C0 and Stockfish will play in the super final. Meanwhile, you can watch my other commented chess games played by computers so far. Here's the link, and you can also watch my best chess games of all time if you want to see the best chess games that have been ever played in chess history. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.